Welcome to the OnTarget HTML5 website YouTube channel. OnTarget HTML5 is dedicated to teaching web development technologies in HTML5, HTML, CSS, CSS3, PHP, MySQL, Flash, and the XML scripting language. We'll also be adding a JavaScript section to the website over the next few months. I hope you enjoy the tutorial.
All right, CSS3 Essential Training Series. This is the CSS3 Essential Training Series. In this tutorial, we are going to talk about the box model in CSS. This is part one of a multi-part tutorial series. When I'm referring to CSS throughout these CSS tutorials, I'm referring to CSS and CSS3. If there are differences that are unique to CSS or unique to CSS3, I will point them out as we go through the tutorial. Okay, so let's talk about the CSS box model. All HTML elements are considered as boxes in the HTML page. In CSS and CSS3, the term box model is used when talking about design and layout. Understanding the CSS box model will make it much easier for you to design your website pages and achieve the effects that you desire in your layouts. Spend the time needed to understand these concepts and it will make your life so much easier as you begin to design your web pages and your websites. The CSS box model is essentially a box that wraps around your HTML elements and consists of the following items. It has margins, borders, padding, and the actual content itself. In our HTML documents, each element that we added to the page is represented as a rectangular box. We looked at this when we were discussing the block elements and the inline elements in our HTML tutorials. If you remember back to those tutorials, we talked about block elements and how they take up all the vertical space that's available in the HTML page. And if you remember, block elements assume that vertical space when they're assigned to our document. Determining the size properties like color, background, borders, and the position of these boxes on the page is the responsibility of the rendering engine for that particular browser. Based on how we program the CSS scripting language, we can actually tell this browser where these should appear in that browser window. And there's a couple different ways that we can do that. The box model allows us to place a border around elements and space elements in relation to other elements on the HTML page. So let's look at a representational diagram of the CSS box model. The first thing we have is the content area. This is the actual content for that particular item, whether it be a div, whether it be an H tag, an H6, an H1, any block level element that we can put in this page, the HTML page, has a content area. The image, an image has a content area. And that content area makes up the content width and the content height. There's also a content edge, which is the borders of that content area. So this is the area containing the real content of the element. It's located inside the content edge, and its dimensions are content width and the content height, the actual dimensions of that content area. From there, we have padding. And the padding area extends the content area, which includes the empty area between the content and the borders surrounding it. And we'll talk about the borders in a minute. But its dimensions are the padding box width plus the padding box height. So the space that's in between the content edge and the border is the padding area. And we control that, again, using CSS and styling. We can actually set what that is. The padding is actually pushes in that content edge from our box. So if I've got a 500 pixel box that's 500 pixels wide in my content edge, and I add 10 pixels of padding all the way around it, my content edge is now 480 pixels wide, because I've actually taken 10 pixels from the right, 10 pixels from the left, and I've put those around that content area for padding, so it pushes my content inside of the content edge for that content area. The border area extends the padding area with border. It's the area inside the border edge. So now we can actually put a border. When you see borders around content in HTML, that's actually part of the padding area, and it's at the edge of that padding. So if I had a 2-pixel border that went completely around my box model, and again, I've got this 500 pixel width, so now I've got a 2-pixel border, a 10-pixel padding, 10-pixel padding, 2-pixel border, so that's 24 pixels. I take those 24 pixels, subtract them from my 500, now I've got my content area, which would be 420 or 476 pixels across. So, and that's how we start calculating this. And we're going to have plenty of demonstrations of this, so you're going to understand this, especially when we get into the development area. It's going to make it a lot easier to understand. And then from that border, outside the border, we actually have a margin. And the margin extends the border area with an empty area used to separate the elements from its neighbors. It's an area inside the margin edge, and its dimensions are the margin box width plus the margin box height. So we can actually add a margin around this entire area. And this actually pushes the content away from its neighbors. So if I had a 10-pixel border at the top and I had another div element above this, I would have a 10-pixel separation between this div and the div above it, assuming that that div above it did not have a margin greater than 10 pixels. And we'll get more into that when we start talking about margin collapse in one of the later sections of this tutorial. So we've got margin, border, padding, and then the content area itself. Just real quick representation of how the box model works. We're going to actually go in now. Let's look at the development environment, look at some of the examples we just talked about, and let's build on that with examples and demonstrations so it makes it a little bit easier for you to understand. All right, so let's move over to our development environment and look at some of the examples that we can use to demonstrate some of the things that we just talked about. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of our presentation window. I want you to go ahead and ensure that your XAMPP server is up and running. Your Apache and MySQL lights are green, or your services are running, so your server's up and operational. And real quick, let me go ahead and get rid of this screen and show you the directory structure I've set up for this tutorial series. And inside my root directory of the web server, I have a CSS directory with my _CSS folder. I also have an images directory. I'm not quite certain if I'm going to use that images directory, but I've got an images directory just in the event I want to use it. And I've also got my basic template HTML, which we're going to load up in the next section of this tutorial so that you can see what we've got in there to start out with our demonstration. All right, so anyone that's done any tutorials with me for the last little while will recognize their screen. They'll notice I've got my dual development environment up. I have got my text editor. I'm currently using Sublime Text 2 on the right-hand side of the screen. And I've got my web server in the root directory on the left-hand side of the screen. For this particular portion of the tutorial, I'm using Firefox as my browser. You can use whatever browser you prefer. Should have no impact on anything that we're going to be doing for this for these tutorials. What I want to do now is I want to go ahead and get that basic template loaded up into our text editor so you can get that saved into your root directory. So if you have access to the exercise files, this will be example 1, file chapter 101 for our exercise files. I'm going to go ahead over to my text editor. I'm going to open up a new file, and I'm going to paste that file into our text editor. Let me go make sure that my word wrapping is set up. It is good. And what this is actually going to be the template file that we're going to use throughout this tutorial. I'm going to go ahead. This is going to be a great time for you to pause the screen if you don't have access to the exercise file so you can catch up and type in. And in a minute, I will scroll that screen up so that you can catch the bottom portions of the file. All right, now let's go ahead and scroll down so you can capture the rest of the file. You'll notice here that I've got my header section. I've set up 3 div IDs with box 1, box 2, box 3, and I've set up a footer section. So in the design of this particular page, we actually have 5 sections to this basic template. All right, so hopefully you've got everything typed. I'm going to go ahead and do a save as. I want to actually save this as the basic template right there inside. Let me go ahead and resize this window for y'all so you can see that we're inside of our root folder. In our tutorials, I'm going to go ahead and save this as the basic template so it shows up in your root directory. And now if you click on basic template in your web browser, it'll bring up what we've just displayed on the right hand side, or what we've actually just built on the right hand side of our screen in that basic model or that basic template. And you'll see that I've got my heading section, training on the box model. That's the H2 tags that we're seeing here in the header. Then I've got my box 1, box 2, box 3, which is my heading text plus the text for the box. And at the very bottom, I've got my footer text. This is called normal document flow. This is how a normal HTML document flows when it's loaded into a browser window. It actually flows from the top to the bottom. Normal document flow is very important for not only for us to help understand how we're going to set up our box model, but it's just important to understand how things flow into the browser window. So let's go ahead and do a save as. I want to save this file because we're going to make a slight change so I can show you what I mean by normal document flow. And I am going to call this, let's call this box model underscore 01 for part 1 underscore 01. So this is the first part of our box model demonstrations, because I don't want to overwrite our basic template file, because if you ever want to go back and start this again, you can. And again, if you have access to those exercise files, you'll have copies of all these files inside there. What I want to do now is just to give you an example of what I mean by normal document flow. I want to go ahead and take out this header. I'm just going to do a Control X to cut this out of our document. I want to take this header and I want to put it below box 1. And then I'm just going to do a Control V to paste it back, and I'm going to go ahead and set up my formatting, my tab formatting, so it's correct again. I'm going to do a save as and save this as box model 01 underscore 02 for the second example in part 1. And now I want to go back to my root directory. Let's go ahead and refresh that root directory of our screen. Let's load up box model underscore 02. And I want you to notice where that header section is inside of our browser window. Notice by moving that below box 1, I've got this training on the box model, which is the header section of my document below box 1, because normal document flow is from top to bottom. And that's an important concept to understand, especially as we start designing our pages. Normal document flow is very, very important to understand inside of our browser window and also inside of our HTML pages. So in the next demonstration, let's go ahead and start doing a little bit of formatting with these so we can start playing around with how we're going to demonstrate how the box model works in HTML and CSS. All right, so let's continue on with this document flow demonstration so you can exactly see how the document does flow before we start moving around or doing anything with this box model. One thing I want you to understand is I have put some images in the images folder inside of our root of the website. If you'll go into the images folder, if you've got the exercise file, you'll actually have these with you. If not, I want you to put in at a minimum of 4 images inside that file. I've got these images at about 260, 275 pixels wide by 185, 190 pixels high. And the reason being is I want to demonstrate something going on with the block elements and the inline elements in normal document flow, so that as we start playing with the block model, you'll understand, or the box model, I mean, you'll understand that we've got to take into consideration normal document flow as well as the box model as we start designing our web pages. So I do have 4 images inside my images folder, inside the root of the website. I want you to be aware of that, so that as we move forward, you'll know where I'm getting these images from. All right, so let's go ahead and I want to go ahead and take this header that we moved during that last demonstration. Let's go ahead and cut this, Control X to cut it. I want to put that back in its normal position, which is at the top of the page, Control V. By the way, the only reason I've left this spacing between these containers or between these elements inside of our web page is so that it's easier for you to read. It has nothing to do with requirement. In fact, we could actually put all this stuff in one long line and it will work just as well on this demonstration. I'm going to go ahead and save the change that we just made. I'm going to go ahead and update my browser window so the header goes back to the top of that page. I'm going to go ahead and do a save as. I want to save this as underscore 0103. So it's the third demonstration in this first portion of our tutorial. And the first thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and I'm going to put some image tags in here. I'm going to put them in box 2. So let's go ahead and copy this image tag. Again, from your exercise file, example 4, I'm going to come right below the paragraph and I'm going to paste that first image tag in there. Let me go ahead and expand this a little bit so you can see what we're doing here. What I want to do is I want to put these images in. I'm going to read that directory. I'm going to place the image. I'm putting the width and the height in there. This would be a good time for you to pause if you've got to type this in because you're using your own images or you don't have the exercise files. And I want to go ahead and add the additional 3. I've actually got 4 images that we're putting in. So I'm going to come right below that image and paste in those 3 additional images. So we've got 4 images inside this box 2. And it doesn't really make a difference what box you install these in or what div ID you install these in. I'm just merely wanting to demonstrate the difference between a block level element, which is everything that we've seen up to this point, all our div tags, all our heading tags, H2s and H3s, plus the paragraph tags are all block level elements. So they take all of the available vertical space inside the browser window. Image tags are not. They're inline level elements. So they're going to take up space based on the size of the actual element or the content of that element. And these are going to be 259 pixels wide and 276 pixels wide. So again, good time to pause if you need to copy this in to your text editor. I'm going to go ahead and save all those changes. I'm going to put my browser back to, or my text editor back to the size it normally is. I'm going to go ahead and refresh my browser window so you can see what occurs now. Now that we've got these, first thing we got to do, obviously, don't forget we want to load the 03 file because right now we are not loading on that file. We actually had the 02 file loaded, so let's go load up 03 and you'll see that we've got these images now appearing in our browser window. But you'll notice even though they're one above the other, image 1 and 2 are side by side. And if I expand the browser window out, you'll find that all 4 of them will go side by side with each other because they're inline level elements. They're not block level. You'll notice my paragraph text did not come up and join my heading text because that is a block level element and it takes up all the vertical space. These images are inline level elements and they will go side by side based on the width of the page. They're going to take up all the space they can side by side until it gets to a point where they're too small to take up any more space. Then they'll just stack on top of one another. I also want you to keep in mind that it's something if you're following along inside of our HTML tutorials, we've talked about this already, the built-in padding and spacing that's part of this particular browser window. You'll notice that we've got space in between the images, we've got space on this left edge, we've got space on the top. None of that stuff we've put in, that's because of the default settings of this particular Firefox browser. Most of your browsers are going to have those default settings. So in order for us to properly do what we're going to try to demonstrate here, I want to get everything set to 0 so that as I start setting these settings for the box model, I know that exactly what my settings are going across my page. So let's go ahead and save this 03 file. And again, I'm pointing out that we've got these differences between inline and block level. Remember, the block level will take up all the vertical space. Inline will take up as much space as they require, and they'll stack one next to the other until the page actually becomes too small, and then they'll start going one on top of the other. And again, that's why I just was doing this to demonstration right there. Okay, so let's save our 0304 file. I want to do a save as, because what I want to do now is I want to go ahead and get rid of all the defaults in this browser. So I'm going to do a save as 0104 so that we've got this nice new file. And the next thing we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and build this CSS reset that I've talked about if you're following along in the HTML tutorials, so that we actually have a good starting point now as we start to put this website together. All right, so let's go ahead and wrap up part 1 of this tutorial. We went ahead and created this new box model _01-04 file. Let's go ahead and make sure that we've saved it. And again, this is the exact same file we had. We're just go ahead and doing a save as. I've still got all my images in here. I'm going to pull those out in a minute, but we'll do that in part 2 of this tutorial series. Go ahead and refresh your browser. I want you to go back though and reload that 0104 file, and it should tell you which file you're on at the top of the screen. You should be able to actually go to the end of that and say 0104. That's what we got. I'm still using my Firefox browser. Haven't made any changes yet, but what I want to do now is I want to go ahead and do that reset that we talked about. And if you're following along, like I said, in the HTML series, I've actually talked about this CSS reset for a couple of tutorials. Now we're going to actually go ahead and create it for the site, the one that we're actually going to use in this site. So I want to go ahead and create a new file. I am going to do a save as. I want to save this as my main.css file inside my CSS folder. And again, if you've got the exercise files, you have access to all these files. I'm going to go ahead and do a save as, save that in my main.css. I also want to go back here to my boxmodel.html file and make certain that we're calling that file, my link is calling that CSS file, main.css, there it is right there, with my version. Make certain that you have the underscore in front of that CSS, because remember I'm using underscore on that folder name, if you remember right from my folder structure. We actually have an underscore CSS just like we're using underscore image inside the folder structure. So we want to make certain that that underscore is reflected in my href for that link. So make sure the underscore is there, save that change. Let's go back to our main.css file. And now what I want to do is in the exercise files under example 5, I actually have my CSS reset that we're going to be using while we create this website. So I'm going to go ahead and put that, paste that into my main.css file. Let me go ahead and turn on my word wrap so you can see all the text that's involved. And now what I'm going to do, if you don't have access to the exercise files, now would be a great time for you to pause this video. I'll give you an opportunity to get this typed in. By the way, let me expand the screen just a tad so it's a little bit easier for you to read. I want to make sure you don't miss anything. There you go. All right, go ahead and pause. And I'm going to go ahead and scroll down so you can get the rest of the file. Now would be a good time to pause the type in the rest of this. This is the CSS reset that I tend to use on most of my websites. You'll notice at the very top, I give the dates and when I've created all this and the version numbers and all that neat stuff. And then at the bottom, it tells me when the reset's complete, because I'm going to use a CSS file for a lot of things, but this is the first thing I do in my CSS file is perform my CSS reset. You go ahead and clean this back out. And you go ahead and save that main.css file. You should have everything typed in now if you don't have access to the exercise files. What I want you to notice is when we update or when I refresh the browser window now for the box model 01_04 file, you're going to see a lot of the margins and paddings. In fact, you're going to see all of them reset to the settings that we've given it in our CSS reset. That's going to occur in every browser regardless of the browser manufacturer. And this is going to give us a standardized starting point for all of our files when we start doing our formatting for our styling of those sheets, for the styling of those pages. So let's go ahead and refresh that browser window. You'll notice everything now is kind of moved in. We've gotten rid of a lot of the things that we had set before. You'll notice I do have some padding on my H tags, my heading tags. I have port 6. In fact, you know what? And actually, I'm going to take out the font size on this because I don't want a font size for these. So let's go ahead and save that change. Go ahead and refresh the browser because the font sizes should be determined individually. So for this particular one, I'm going to take out the font sizes. I'm actually going to take out the default. In fact, you know what? I'm going to take out the entire heading section of my CSS reset for this particular. Let's do a save. For this particular tutorial, I'm going to take out the entire heading section. There we go. Let's get everything really crammed together, because what we're going to do is as we work through this tutorial now, I'm going to actually do the formatting individually for my heading tags, individually for my boxes, and individually for my inline elements. So we've got a good starting point now. In part 2 of this tutorial, in the next part of the tutorial for the box model, we're going to actually go through now and start formatting the things that we need to format to actually get a document flow the way I would like this page to appear. The last thing I want to do is I'm going to pull out these images because I don't want them as part of this. Not yet. I'm going to save that change to boxmodel_01_04.html so that we all have a good starting point in part 2 of this tutorial series, and I look forward to seeing you there.
I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can be notified of tutorials as they're posted. And don't forget to check out our website, www.ontargethtml5.com, for a complete listing of all the tutorials that are available for viewing. There's many more than we don't have posted up on YouTube. I look forward to your feedback, and thank you for visiting the OnTarget HTML5 YouTube channel.